Catus Maximus here, this time bringing you a review of the 1/4" drive Lisle spring hose clamp vices. These are special tools for working with these infamous spring type hose clamps of many different sizes. I also believe that these are the 2nd generation ones. There are two part numbers, 44500 and 44480. What I've noticed is I did a little looking around online, and there appears to be a type A and a type B, or type 1 and 2. And I believe, or I would hope, that these are the 2nd generation ones. The 1st generation ones did not have the little notches in the teeth to help hold the spring when you want to move the clamp back. And then they didn't have as good or as strong a knurling on the handle, and it was tapered, so you didn't have as much grip. So this appears to be a response to issues that customers have had, and Lisle has modified it. You can see the knurling now on this is not too bad. It's actually pretty good. Even though these are Lisle, they don't actually say Lisle anywhere on them, which is kind of interesting. But they are just a simple little vise mechanism. You have a moving jaw here, which is activated by, let me get a fixed focus, there we go. Moving the thumb wheel back and forth, it just travels on this screw. The screw there's like a divot or a counterbore in this fixed jaw. And then there's like a little T shape on the screw. So what happens is you pass the screw through, and then this handle or thumb wheel is put on, and then they use a little Allen set screw, so you can take it apart. And then the two beams are just pressed into the piece of metal. It appears that these are, sintered metallurgy. Another nice aspect is they do have cutouts and stops. So if you run this all the way down, I'm a little too zoomed in there. It will stop before the vise jaws come all the way together. That way, because it's designed to work in places where it's hard to reach, you're not cranking all the way down and then having the vise jaws actually get really chewed up, because these spring bands are made of pretty hard steel. These are pretty handy in a variety of situations. They can be left on the hose clamp while you do your project, or of course release them. They're, obviously for tight situations, but they can kind of be difficult to use at times. And you can have sometimes a hard time getting a grip just because there's not a lot to hold on to while you're tightening it down. The last thing would be to keep them well lubricated, because they tend to want to bind up and have a lot of friction when they're dry. They have two different sizes, basically a small and a large, and there's about a 3/4 of an inch difference between both of them. That would be the only difference. It would be nice if they had an even smaller and longer ones. If they're going to come out with two sizes, why not, a 3-piece set? And we'll demonstrate how these work. You just have the little vise and say this clamp is on a hose, so you realize that you need to get it pretty close. If you do have them lubed up, they do work pretty well. And the idea is that it just goes, you just kind of push it onto the end of the hose clamp like that. Whoop. There we go. And you kind of wobble it around so it'll get caught in those little teeth there. And you can use a 1/4" drive. A little flex joint makes it a lot easier. And so this is always the tough part, is you really got to have a good grip. And so there'll be situations where you end up having to hold these flats with a box wrench. They're flats this way between these two surfaces and these two surfaces, and you may end up having to hold that with pliers or a box wrench to get these to crank down, which is one thing I've read on other reviews, is just exactly that it can take a bit of force to actually squeeze these clamps down even when it's well lubed. And if you're in a truly tight spot, you have a hard time actually just keeping this clamp from rotating while you're trying to actually apply pressure to it or with it. So that'd be some of the caveats, but I found them to be, in the plenty of situations to be actually quite nice, just because you have a more controlled method of getting the spring clamp. And with the new notches, I thought they were kind of weird the way they offset them, but they're not bad. And actually, if we see, we can jiggle this around, and that clamp is actually pretty well in there. It's surprising. So once you get it in there, it's really on it, and you can actually wiggle this and get it to slide up the hose. And that, for as cumbersome as they may be in some tight situations, they make up for it by holding onto the clamp really well. So once you do get it clamped down, you can really muscle that spring clamp up the hose and get it off the fitting. The other alternative, there's spring clamp pliers. There's some other tools which work okay. The only other style I'd really recommend is these cat's paw styles. So these are cable type spring clamp pliers, and they just have a special handle here. And they're sold all over online. And this one's called a cat's paw, but they're just cable type spring hose clamp pliers. They're sold by a bunch of manufacturers. They're pretty cheap. And a lot of situations I do end up using these because they are convenient. But the kind of issues with these is that they're really small, so they have a kind of a tougher time holding on to the clamp, and then they don't have any real cutouts, so oftentimes you'll get the clamp squeezed with this, and then as soon as you try to manipulate the clamp, this thing will fall off. So that would be the alternative. It's not perfect, so it's kind of nice to have both of these among using, standard, adjustable channel locks, whatever the adjustable pliers are called. So anyway, I just wanted to bring a quick review and the attention to these little hose vices is what they're called. I seen these, but I couldn't figure out how to find them online because they call them hose vices. They don't call them hose clamps. And the other nice aspect of these is they've actually been handy in a variety of other projects. There's been a few situations where I needed to hold a couple surfaces together so the sharp edges really grab onto the plastic and you can use them to compress together. So I found it handy in a couple other situations where I've wanted some little clamps like this. So that was another reason to purchase them. They're also really cheap. I think it was like 25 bucks for both of them. So anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching, and please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.